So, wir warten noch ganz kurz. Das Ganze muss ja auch zu Facebook. Ich sehe, wie sich der Zuschauerraum langsam füllt. Wir warten noch eine Minute, bevor es losgeht, damit auch alle sich eingewählt haben. Und bei Facebook streamen wir das Ganze auch jetzt live. Also falls jemand hier Tonprobleme hat, weil letztes Mal gab es wohl Tonprobleme, kann er oder sie gern einfach zu Facebook wechseln. Genau, also es sind jetzt einige Zuschauer, Zuschauerinnen da. Ich würde sagen, wir fangen einfach an. Ich habe gerade schon kurz mit Hiwar und Kamal gesprochen. Ich mache die Einleitung schnell auf Deutsch und dann wechseln wir ins Englische. Hiwar spricht nämlich leider kein Deutsch. Also, genau, ich bin Caro, ich bin von der Gesellschaft für bedrohte Völker. Das ist Kamal, auch von der Gesellschaft für bedrohte Völker. Wir sind eventuell schon bekannt. Und Hiwar ist Journalist und ist berichtet uns live aus Kurdistan über die Situation vor Ort. Wir werden ihm einige Fragen stellen auf Englisch. Sie können gerne auf Deutsch oder Englisch fragen. Wir werden es dann dementsprechend übersetzen, wenn Sie auf Deutsch fragen. Und wie immer gilt, nutzen Sie gern entweder den Chat für Fragen oder das Frage- und Antwort-Tool, was Zoom hier auch schon bereitstellt. Genau, ansonsten wünschen wir einen schönen Abend, einen interessanten Abend und stellen Sie alle Fragen, die Sie wollen. Hiwar, nice to meet you. It's the first time we meet. I think I will make the moderation. I will ask you some questions if you're okay, and just let me know if there's something I need to ask. At first of all, actually, I just want to know, how are you? How is life in North Syria right now?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I'll be trying to give an overview of the situation in northeast Syria and also in or what's called Rojava, and also in Iraqi-Kurdistan. You know, the dichotomy, the situation now in these two regions is becoming very much connected, given the common threats that both sides face. Both Northeast Syria, Rojava, and Iraqi-Kurdistan, they have the ongoing threat of ISIS. ISIS sees them as an arch enemy, as a big threat, one of the key instruments in overthrowing the ISIS caliphate was the role of the Kurds both in Syria and in Iraq. The other common threat that both sides face is Turkey. Turkey sees both sides again as a threat to its existence. Erdogan repeatedly said that we do not want to see something in North Syria similar to that of North Iraq. So that means he's not happy with North Iraq. That's why he doesn't want to see anything similar in North Syria. The situation in Northeast Syria or in Rojava is quite volatile, I must say. You know, the people, the key challenge for the civilians, for the people who are living in these areas, is that they do know what tomorrow will hold for them. They don't know if tomorrow the Turkish army is going to invade. They don't know if tomorrow is the American presence in this area will end. They don't know if Assad, and in agreement with the Russians and the Iranians, might come and attack these areas. It's the uncertainty of the future is the key thing. And as a result, you know, if you live in an uncertain environment, in an environment where you do not have the certainty of your future, you cannot build anything. Despite all this uncertainty, they are trying to keep going. They are trying to make things go in the right direction. But the key challenge for them is to know what will happen tomorrow. And this is a very difficult question to answer. They are trying to make steps in that direction. And thanks to some international friends with that, they are trying to create to put the Kurdish house in order. The ruling authorities there in these areas, or the administrative authorities, the SDF, the Syrian Defense Forces, led by General Mazloum Kobani, is trying to mediate or to bring together, to put some kind of dialogue between the various Kurdish political factions, those who are inside Rojava and those who are outside. In that, of course, the KDP and its leader, Masoud Barzani, has also played a role in trying to create a kind of a political understanding between the various political groups in Rojava about the future. But the process is going very slow. The slowness of this process is also adding to the uncertainty and the anxiety of the people there. This is coupled with the continued threats of Erdogan that he could invade. Every now and then he bombs. The other day, they bombarded certain areas near Tel Abyad, other villages in the vicinities of Qamishli. Erdogan's pattern with these areas, he bombards the various areas and it's the same thing happening. We are seeing it in northeast Syria, in Rojava, and we are also seeing it in Iraqi-Kurdistan. The other day, they bombed area of Penjwin near the Iranian border, south of Suleimania, for example, all the way on the other side, with the excuse of PKK. When the TV cameras went to the field, the site of the bombing, it was tomato fields and tomato and watermelon fields of farmers in the area. So they were not the Turkish state, and in the areas that they are now attacking in near the border, again with the excuse of PKK, they are exercising scorched earth policy, just like Afrin. Many trees are being cut, entire areas are being wiped out. We are talking about an area from some eyewitness accounts in these areas, an area that extends 320 kilometers with long and with a depth of 30 kilometers. That entire area is full of Turkish bases and villagers, farmers, local people, beehive owners. You know, these areas are quite fertile and very good areas agriculturally for fruits and for other kinds of agricultural produce. Not only they are not allowing the people to go back to the areas, but they are cutting the trees and burning the areas under the pretext that the PKK could be using these areas. So that's the situation generally in both northeast Syria, is one of uncertainty, I would say.
Yeah, you just said it before when we talked that this might be just a little small introduction. You can write a whole book about the situation. So you spoke about a lot of things. Let me get this clear for our viewers. Let me talk about the role of Turkey and Erdogan. What are the intentions?
Well, watching their role, watching their intentions, and if we go back, let's say at least from the time of 2014, when ISIS took over a third of Iraq, took over Mosul, took over parts of Syria, and tried to expand their attacks on other areas, on the Yazidi villages. They kicked out the Christian people of Mosul. Turkey, and there were about 70 workers of the Turkish consulate in Mosul. The safest people, the only people who were safe in the ISIS takeover of Mosul were the workers of the Turkish consulate. They were sent back to Turkey without any harm. Their role, if you go back to if you are to analyze a map of the areas in the Middle East in general that Erdogan has a problem with, and mark the countries and the regions that Erdogan has a problem with, and they are at odds with the Turkish government, bring another map and mark the places where ISIS is conducting or was conducting an armed conflict, an armed confrontation, armed campaign in these areas and conducting its terrorist attacks, you will find that the two maps were identical, you know. Looking at ISIS, for example, they operated, Erdogan had a problem with Iraqi-Kurdistan, they attacked Iraqi-Kurdistan. Erdogan had a problem with Syrian Kurds, they were attacking Syrian Kurds. Erdogan had a problem with Libya, they were operating in Libya. Erdogan had a problem with Egypt, they were operating in Egypt. Erdogan does not have a problem with Iran. They are not in conflict. They don't openly speak against each other. Not a single ISIS operation in Iran. And this is a Shiite country, and ISIS is supposed to be a Sunni anti-Shia organization. So it is very clear, just watching the big picture, you could see that any place the AK party or Erdogan had a problem with, you found that ISIS is operating. Now, as we speak, the prisoners of ISIS in northeast Syria, in Rojava, that are under SDF control, or people in the camps that are deemed to be dangerous operators or operatives in Al-Hol camp and in other areas who are still upholding the values of ISIS and the caliphate, and they say with the caliphate will come back and everything else. If you go and speak to them, send journalists or see whatever they talk to journalists in their interviews, and all these NGOs, when they talk to them, they would say, this is all temporary. Erdogan is going to come and liberate us from these kafirs, meaning SDF, meaning the others. So what is keeping them hopeful about their future, what is keeping them hopeful about the return of the caliphate of ISIS is the continued threats of Erdogan that he will be attacking these two regions, northeast Syria with his army. And the first thing that he will be doing is that these guys will be freed. If you look at the areas that Erdogan has occupied, be it Afrin, be it Serikani and other areas, you will find that the militias that he's using under the name of the Free Syrian Army, they operate, first of all, the look, their operation, the rules, the laws, their modus operandi, their whole behavior is a carbon copy of what Mosul was like under ISIS control, or Raqqa. You know, it isn't that much of a difference. The only difference is that they are not called ISIS, but you look at their behavior, you look at the laws, the rules for the people that they are that they want to institute. It is exactly, you cannot tell if you take somebody to these cities, to Serikani, for example, the area, or Afrin, and don't show them any signs, just let them spend some time on the streets, they would tell you this is ISIS rule, people who are in Raqqa or in Mosul. It is exactly the same operation that even the mercenaries that he is using in areas like Libya and these other areas, they are very similar to. So you can nowadays, as an ISIS member, it is very, you have an alternative to a new dress to wear. You go to Erdogan's area, you change your logo to say Free Syrian Army, to say any militia group, and to say we are with Erdogan under the pretext of Itilaf, the Syrian opposition, and you can operate exactly like ISIS. You can operate all the rules, the laws of ISIS, and you don't have to say that they are ISIS because Erdogan is providing you with a cover.
Okay, that's quite an interesting point I've never thought about. So let me thank you for this input. I have a little fun fact to make because you spoke about hope, and Kamal told me that your name is translated and it means hope.
Yes.
So it's quite nice impact here. We got a question from a viewer, and I think it's the perfect point to ask you this question because you spoke about the role of Turkey and Erdogan, and the viewer wants to know which role does the NATO play?
You know, your sound is very far. I'm having difficulty hearing you clearly. Is it possible to speak maybe closer, or maybe if you have a microphone to use or something?
Yeah, let me just 1 minute. Kamal, you need to speak now and I can change it. Kamal, du bist
unmute.
Yeah, what about the role of the NATO? You are speaking about the role of Turkey. What about the NATO as organization?
Look, there is in the Middle East, as people, both in Syria and Iraq, there are two faces of NATO that we are seeing. One face is the United States. The other face is Turkey. And they're both having two opposite agendas. You could clearly see. One NATO member, well, that is the United States. They are adamant to end ISIS. They are adamant to say, they say, we want to spread democracy, we want to spread rule of law, we want to spread equality. And they are partnering with the local Kurds in the war against ISIS. That's one face of NATO. The other face of NATO, and the air force of that face of NATO, that NATO member, which is the United States of America, is supporting the fighters, the Kurdish fighters, in the war against ISIS and other fighters. The other face of NATO is Turkey. They are really not against ISIS. We can see it on the ground. It took a long time to convince Turkey to come in and take part in the war against ISIS. And the first thing that they did was bomb the PKK. A partner, an indirect partner of the international coalition to fight ISIS. They were in war against ISIS in various fronts. And they wanted to find YPG and everybody else, all the other Kurdish units. One NATO members, this is what they want to do. And then Turkey, you see, they are more against the Kurds than being against ISIS. Their planes, their air power is being used to hit the Kurds, to bomb Kurdish areas. They bombed Sinjar the other day. They bombed Penguin near Suleimania. They bombed the areas of the mountains. And these areas, if they are adjacent to the Turkish borders, if these areas fall under complete Turkish control, we have the scenario of Afrin and Serikani. They will be populated with these militias, pro-Syrian militias of Turkey, at least, and they could take over these areas. So NATO as such only exists on paper in Iraq. There are two conflicting NATO members in Iraq. There is no such thing. We don't. If you ask the people of Syria, Kurdistan of Syria or Kurdistan of Iraq, say, where is NATO? That same question that you just asked, they would tell you which NATO, Turkey's NATO or America's NATO. So NATO practically doesn't exist. It depends on where you are.
Dear Hiwa, but USA know this problem. For example, Brett McGovern, the former representative of anti-ISIS coalition, said that he spent the most of his time to talk to Turkey, close the border for ISIS, for jihadists from.
Exactly.
Why they cannot stop or change this policy, I mean the policy of Turkey?
Look, let me just complete what Brett McGurk said. He said it took us ages to convince them to close the borders for ISIS fighters, because the natural route of ISIS, and you can hear it from various social media, from everybody, all eye account witnesses, a lot of people who traveled through Turkey during that time, and still until now. You get trained in a different area, and then you go to Istanbul airport, or you are recruited wherever you are in Europe, in the Middle East. Then you get a ticket to Istanbul. From Istanbul, you go to Jarablus or to the areas on the border with Syria, and you cross into Syria to Raqqa to fight with the Caliphate. This was the route for all the jihadis, European jihadis, and everybody else who wanted to join ISIS. Brett McGurk is on record saying it took us ages to convince them to close the borders, and they didn't really close the borders. The minute the Kurds took over these areas and they started to have control, he immediately built a wall 400 kilometers from the triangle border between Syria, Iraq, and Turkey, and all the way to Jarablus. Any area that had Kurds in it, he immediately built that wall, a double wall on both sides of the railway line, and he built it with European funds to help refugees that are Syrian refugees who are in Turkey. That money was used to build this wall. He kept the area in Jarablus and the other areas under his control, and they're not under Kurdish control. And that area stayed to be as the area, the passage for all these international jihadis to come in and join Raqqa, to go to Raqqa to join the caliphate. So why is America still connected, or it is trying to turn a blind eye in Turkey for all of this? Is a very good question, really. The Americans will have to answer that. Now that especially Brett McGurk is back on board with he said this in the period between when he was fired by Mr. Trump and before he comes back on board with the new administration. So I would be interested to hear what he thinks now about Turkey's role in supporting ISIS and in destabilizing the Middle East in general.
Hiwa, maybe I can help you to answer this question, why American do this or do another thing. You know, American and other NATO government says that they need NATO to fight Iran, to fight Russia, to fight Chinese. But we see that Turkey, I mean Erdogan, is working very, very closely with Russia, with Iran, in Astana, in this so-called of peace process in Syria. He is working very well with Iran, with Putin, not for NATO and Western, but against NATO and Western.
Look, I think the way Erdogan operates is it's almost he has a membership card of a club, and he uses that membership card to go and bully everybody using that club and working against the policies of that club. This is what he's doing. I mean, on its surface, it seems that Iran and Turkey are competing. You look at every country in the Middle East, Iran and Turkey are not fighting, are indirectly competing over control. But look at the borders of Iran and Turkey. They have borders between them. The most stable and secure border in the Middle East is the border between Iran and Turkey. Nothing happens there, you know? But they both compete in Iraq. They both compete in Mosul, in Syria. They compete in Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan and Armenia. They go all the way to, I don't know, wherever, any other area in the region. But there seems to be a gentleman's agreement between the two, not to go into direct conflict with each other. So if NATO thinks that Turkey will be a good ally in its conflict with Iran, should there be a conflict, if there was a conflict, or if America thinks that Turkey will be a good ally if a conflict arises between America and Iran, they only have to look at how good an ally Turkey was in the war against ISIS.
Carolina, maybe you have some question to our friend Hiwa?
Yeah, I hope my sound might be better now. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm sorry for Kama. He's always asking the tricky questions. He wants to answer himself, but now that's why I'm doing the interview with you tonight. Thank you at first for your input. Another viewer wants to thank you for your input, and he's asking a question. Would you suggest that ISIS serves as a tool in neo-Osmanic explanation policy, or does it merely seem as a lesser evil for Erdogan?
Can I see it?
I hope so in FNQ tool. Otherwise, I could put it in the chat.
Could you put it in the chat, please?
Yes, of course. No, I can't.
Okay, what was the question again? Sorry.
Would you suggest that ISIS serves as a tool in neo-Osmanic expansionism policy, or does it merely seem as a lesser evil for Erdogan?
Look, I mean, as I said, you look at the, still, I think that argument is still valid. If you take a map of the Middle East and look at the areas where ISIS is operating, juxtapose this map, compare it to another map of the areas where Erdogan has his Ottoman dreams or he has a conflict with, you will find them exactly the same countries and regions. So, and it is very difficult to say that this is mere pure coincidence that in Syria, in Iraq, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Libya, not in Iran. You know, ISIS operations, there are zero ISIS operations in Iran because Turkey doesn't have a problem with Iran. So it is very clear, and Turkey doesn't have ambitions. You know, the Ottoman Empire didn't exist in Iran. There was the Safawi Empire. So the military wing for Mr. Erdogan, and I hope they can hear me, and I hope they take me to court for saying this.
I don't hope so.
And I'm willing to go to court to defend that point. Is the military wing for Mr. Erdogan is not the Turkish army, although he's using it to commit various war crimes and atrocities, but his real military wing for his political agenda in the Middle East is ISIS and the jihadis. It's very clear.
This might be the same answer, but another viewer is asking if there's any chance that Turkey regime is sooner or later coming to an end.
It's very difficult to say this. Look, Turkey is an important country in the Middle East if it is run in the right direction. At one point, I remember all of us used to say, Turkey can present a very important model in the Middle East to show that Islam and democracy are not mutually exclusive, to show that they have finally started a peace process with their own Kurds, and to show that they were willing at long last to take this vast Kurdish population that exists in Turkey on board and have them as real partners in running the affairs of the country. But what we have seen is a total regression from that standpoint. Zero peace process with the Kurds, zero tolerance, even MPs, heads of municipalities and these mayors in the areas of the Kurdish areas of Turkey and the Kurdish cities are all locked up in prison. These are elected officials. On that front, there is the zero tolerance. They were at one point they were talking about zero problem, صفر problem. Now it's surf problem, pure problems with every neighbor that they have. Turkey. It has turned from acting as the older brother in the Middle Eastern sense into the bully of the Middle East. You know, anywhere they want, they can go and they send militias, they bomb. So the way this important state, look at the Turkish economy, look at the Turkish problems inside, the price of the lira, all of these things are direct results of this, of the policies of the current government or the president. So the way things are going now, I think Turkey will only move from bad to worse. There are nothing that suggests the way that they are operating today will make Turkey a better place to be in. You know, with these policies, there are more restrictions on freedom of speech, more people are being put in prison, more authoritarian practices by the president, and less opposition, weaker opposition day by the day, weaker parliament, everything is weak. And he has gotten himself into a situation where he has to compete with the ultra-nationalists on who to be more hardline, which is the exact opposite of the promise that the AK party came to power with.
Thank you. At first, I think I speak for all of us if I say we don't want you to go to prison. So I hope you won't.
Let's see.
There's another question. You can read it in the chat, I think, if you want to, but let me read it out loud. For the case of new direct aggression by the Turkish army, which guarantees has the Biden administration given for the security of Rojava, northern Syria?
It's
the last one.
Practically nothing, really. There are no guarantees. I mean, everyone was alarmed when we heard the Biden speech about Afghanistan, about withdrawal from Afghanistan, after all these money, efforts, and lives that they have put after 20 years. And just as a small exercise, I took his speech and I published it in an article last week or the week before. And I took his article, his speech, and I switched the words of Afghanistan with Iraq, and I changed Taliban with the militia. And you can apply the same thing in Syria and in Rojava.
Where did you publish it? Maybe
it is on Rudao English, Biden's speech for withdrawal from Iraq.
Okay.
And it worked. It worked very well, you know. They could argue exactly the same points if they want to withdraw from Iraq or from Syria. They could say, we never came to build a democracy. We never came to do this. We came to end ISIS, and ISIS is over. And add to it, we didn't come to protect you from Turkey. You know, that's the big what's the word? The big dichotomy that يعني التناقض بعربي أونية the hypocrisy of the situation. On one hand, they say we are here to end ISIS, but we are not here to protect you from Turkey. That's we heard President Trump saying this in the past. They said they've been fighting, let them continue fighting. We don't have a dog in this fight. But then what they fail to see that if they allow Turkey to attack, it will only pave the way for ISIS to come back again. But a different ISIS that is more tame, they operate in exactly the same way under Turkish patronage. That's why the Kurds of Iraq and the Kurds of Syria were very much alarmed by the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. And they fear that the same thing, they could face the same thing. This morning, the Consul General in Erbil, the American Consul General in Erbil, made some very strong statements. It came after President Macron's visit yesterday, saying that even if America withdraws, we will not withdraw. I think it seemed as a direct reaction to what President Macron said, to say to the Kurds of Iraq and to the Iraqis that we will not withdraw. Not withdrawing from Iraqi-Kurdistan also could mean that they will not withdraw from Syria. But withdrawing from Iraqi-Kurdistan is definitely a withdrawal from Syria as well, because their presence in Syria, in Rojava, totally depends on their presence in Iraqi-Kurdistan. So we will not see a situation of them withdrawing from Iraqi Kurdistan but staying in Syria. They can't, practically it's impossible. What's keeping them in Rojava is that line between Rojava and Iraqi Kurdistan.
Last week we spoke with a journalist who was in Afghanistan, and he told us that the local people support the Taliban. And I just wanted to know if there are any local people also support the ISIS.
It depends on where you're talking about. I mean, if we talk about Iraq as a whole, the threat of the Taliban equivalent is different in every area. If you go to the south of Iraq, if America withdraws tomorrow, the scenario will be as follows. Iran's militias will take over the south, totally. They will be the most powerful. The Iraqi army is still not that ready, or for as long as there is something called Hashid, it will still be seen as a more respected or a more powerful entity, more ideological entity than the Iraqi army. So, and Iran has many militias within Hashid that pushes them in that direction. So the south of Iraq will be completely taken over by Hashid, by Iran's militias. In the center, where the presence of Iran's militias are, and the center of Iraq, I mean the Sunni areas and the areas of Article 140, the mixed areas between the Kurds and the Arabs that are not disputed territories, we will see a Shia-Sunni conflict in these areas, because the militias that are there, they are trying to impose a sectarian style of governance in these areas. They almost behave like an occupying force in these areas for fear of ISIS to return. As a reaction, the local population, especially the younger ones, could say that ISIS or could think about joining anything that will fight these militias. And that could be ISIS 2.0 or Erdogan's ISIS for that matter. In Kurdistan, the situation will be different. If America withdraws, Turkey could tell the Americans and persuade the Americans that they should take their places. So the bases of Harir, of the Erbil airport and other areas where the Americans are present, the soldiers could be replaced by the Turks, by the Turkish soldiers. And this will be a recipe for disaster for everybody.
Hiwa, I have a question. Maybe you can tell us about the role of Russia in Iraq and in Syria and the Kurds in both countries.
Look, Russia doesn't have that much of a direct role in Iraq the way it has it in Syria. But a key message that Russia's behavior versus America's behavior is sending to the people, to the local to the local forces and parties in Iraq and in Syria is the following. If you are an ally of Russia, they stand by you to the last, to the end. They don't let you down, just like what happened with Assad. If you are an ally of America, they use you like a taxi from A to B, and they tell you goodbye. That taxi policy of America with its allies has happened in the past, and people fear that it could be repeated. And I suspect because after America's withdrawal from Afghanistan, and before that, many people like us would be telling the authorities, would say in public commentary and everything else, if the KRG or the Iraqi government wants to secure something for itself, they need to be talking to the Iranians, they need to be talking to the Russians. They are better, what's the word? They are better allies than the United States. If you are an Iranian ally, look at Iraq. If you are an Iranian ally, they would stick by you to the end. But if you're an American ally, they could leave you. That's not a big problem. Possibly, perhaps, the remarks of the Consul General today in Erbil, the American Consul General, came as a reaction to this image that America has in the region, that they they could drop their allies in return for any other deal elsewhere. So again, Russia's role in Iraq, it is not that much. But in Syria, they are very powerful, as you can see. They are the ones who kept the regime to this minute.
Hiwa, what about the Chinese in Iraq, in Syria?
Politically, they do not have that much of a presence, or they're not relevant. But again, I mean, trying to strike deals, economic deals with the Chinese has been the hope of the Iraqi government in the past. Adel Abdul Mahdi, the previous prime minister, went to China and signed a deal with them that has quite diverse areas of economy, agriculture, electricity, and everything else. But given the turmoil that we have been through, none of it has gone through. But again, I mean, China is an important economic player in Iraq and in Syria, of course. Anywhere you go, China keeps its importance.
All right. Let us to go to my friend Erdogan again, maybe. Erdogan claims that he stands up for Muslim. Why is he silent about the persecution of the Uyghur minority in China?
Exactly.
Why does he oppress Kurds? Are they also not Muslim?
Look, I mean, Erdogan, it's very clear. He's quite selective with which Muslims he stands up for and which people he wants to protect. And which Kurds does he side with? For a while, Turkey had a policy of good Kurds, bad Kurds. Some Kurds were good for Turkey, some Kurds were bad. But at the bottom, all Kurds are the same. And the way they looked at Kurds was always the same thing. That good Kurd, bad Kurd policy was only a temporary thing for them to get to use the good Kurds to end the bad Kurds, and then they would end the good Kurds after that. So Erdogan has been quite a hypocrite, I think, with his policies, with the slogans that he talks about, protecting these people, not protecting the others, standing up for this, standing up for that. But at the end of the day, all his policies fed into his bigger Ottoman ambitions for the Middle East. You know, he still sees himself as the Sultan with an army of international jihadis. You know, that's what he had, international and local jihadis. It is not fashionable for him, or it wasn't acceptable by the international community for him to use ISIS because he's a member of NATO. He wants to become a member of EU, or maybe he wants to be, they were thinking of him as a member of EU. So now he's using Syrian militias, but they are exactly the same as ISIS. You know, if you go to this small fighter, you know, any of the fighters from Serikani, and take him out and tell him, who are you? Explain to me what you stand for. And go to an ISIS fighter in a prison, either in Iraq or in Syria, and tell him, what do you stand for? They would tell you exactly the same thing. I mean, it's not that much of a difference.
Maybe I can talk about another example. Afrin area, Kurdish Afrin area. The Kurds in Afrin are mostly Muslim, Sunni, Hanafi like me, but Erdogan fighting us.
Absolutely. As I said, I mean, he's quite selective. They are fighting you not because you're Muslim, he's fighting because you're Kurds. And he has expanded, he's racist, you know, basically. He's quite racist against any Kurdish presence. Do you know the Austrian airline? It was delayed back then for that line to open from Vienna to Erbil. It was delayed by a few months, at least something like 6 months, to open because of Turkish opposition for that flight to use Turkish airspace. And at the end, Turkey agreed with the condition that the announcements inside the plane that connects Erbil to Vienna, while over Turkish airspace, should not be used in Kurdish.
Carolina, your questions?
Yeah, another viewer had the question. What can people do in order to prevent Erdogan invading more parts of Rojava?
I think there are a couple of things to be done. Step number one, internally, the Kurdish dialogue, the current internal Kurdish dialogue should quickly come to a conclusion. The current administration in Rojava is accused of having links with the PKK, or having similar views and ideas to the PKK that Erdogan is trying to use to justify attacking Rojava. So uniting putting the Kurdish house in order in Rojava is step number one, because the way things are now, some of them are in Istanbul and in Ankara, that Erdogan is using through the Syrian opposition puppets. And it is being used as an excuse to attack. The presence of some Kurds on the other front is being used as an excuse to attack more areas of Rojava. So step number one is to unite the Kurds inside and have a more inclusive administration. Step number two, Kandil, which is a euphemism for PKK, and the KDP and Erbil, they need to come to a common understanding, a joint understanding about Rojava. And the two sides of the dialogue, one calls Kandil and one calls Erbil for decisions that are to do with Rojava. That should stop. Third, once they unite, once they are one political entity, that is Rojava independent, Rojava local, then they can go around various countries and ask for support. The problem we have now, we hear some representatives of the PYD, for example, they go to a European capital and they say 1, 2, 3. And then after them, an NKC, KNC delegation goes to the same cities and says exactly the opposite of what they said. So that creates a big gap that Erdogan is using. So protecting Rojava should start with Kurdish unity, and not just unity on paper, but unity in running Rojava, and in administering Rojava, and in lobbying together in the international capitals.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask you one of my favorite questions. I'm always asking the people if I'm interviewing them to human rights abuse. What should Germany do in all these conflicts?
Thank you. Good question. I think Germany should look at France, the way they operated. They should be more engaged. Today, for us, I mean, we are seeing some programs by institutions like GIZ and others operating inside Iraq and possibly Syria. I'm not sure, maybe through partners. But Germany should stop behaving like a human rights organization, you know? Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch. They're concerned about this, concerned about that. Germany's role was effective, very much effective in the war against ISIS, in helping. You know, many of our kids are called Milan. Now, Milan is the missile, the anti-tank missile that Germany gave the Kurdish Peshmerga to stop the ISIS attackers. But Germany can exert an important role in declaring its commitment to protecting the only two areas in the Middle East that are trying to uphold the same values as Germany stands for, you know. Otherwise, you will keep getting refugees.
Okay, thank you. I think I've never got a so clearly answer to that question, so thank you. Yeah, I think we should come to an end slowly. Kamal, do you have another question? And otherwise, I will ask the viewer questions. If,
Carolina, I haven't question to Hiwa.
okay.
Many thanks to you, Hiwa, to speak to us in Germany.
Okay. I have another question, a question of a viewer, and I think it's a good question because we are an organization for minorities. And let me ask this question: how is the situation of other religious minorities and ethnic groups in Syria? Are they threatened by the Turkey and other Islamic groups?
It depends on where they are. I remember I was in Qamishli once a few months ago, and somebody said that the problem with the minorities is their political representatives, and depends where they are and where they sit. A European diplomat told me that the PYD or the SDF is banning Friday sermons, and they banning church Sunday mass at the churches because they are very secular. And I said, who told you this? And the diplomat said, that the representatives of the Christian minority in Northeast Syria. I said, who were they? And they were the people who were connected to Erdogan. Some people who were part of Itilaf and going around telling European diplomats. And I said, I don't think it's true, but luckily it was Saturday. So on Sunday, I went to the churches and I filmed these events, the mass, and I sent it to the diplomat by video to say, look, I mean, you don't believe everything you hear from the various parts. Historically, the Kurdish areas of Iraq and Syria had better deal for the religious and ethnic minorities or components that were there. We all remember the pictures of the Kurdish Peshmerga in Mosul in various areas trying to put back the cross on one of the churches, rebuilding churches that were turned into mosques by ISIS. This was one, but again, I mean, it depends on where you are. Erdogan doesn't care about the minorities. If he cared, he could have stopped ISIS, or he could have asked ISIS the same way as they protected his 70 employees of the consulate in Mosul, not to kick out the Christians from Mosul to come to Erbil and to the KRG. So wherever you see extremism, religious extremism, you will see oppression of religious minorities, of the Yazidis, of the Christians, Jews is something, not even talk about it, you know, for these, in these areas. Generally, the Kurdish community is more receptive, although we have some radicalized local Kurds and some of the groups, but generally there are the laws and the attitude of the authorities, both in Iraqi-Kurdistan and in Rojava, is much more receptive and open to religious minorities than other places that we have seen in the region.
Carolina, maybe I can ask another question.
Yeah, I hope Hiwa has time. So,
Hiwa, can I?
Please go ahead.
I want to ask
Last
about radical Islamists in the Kurdish society in Syria and Iraq. What about radical? Because Kurds mostly are Sunni Muslim. We have Shia, we have Yazidi, we have Alawis. What about radical Islamism in Kurdish society in Iraq and Syria, maybe in Iran or Turkey?
In Syrian, in Rojava, I didn't see any of that, to be honest. I went around and I remember once we did a little calculation of the Kurdish Syrian political parties. they came to 83 or 84 parties. And this is including, like in one family, you have 3 secretary generals of political parties, but 83 political parties representing the Kurds of Syria, not a single one of them has the word Muslim or Islam in them. Compare that with the situation in Iraqi-Kurdistan, it is a lot more, let's say, I would say conservative society. And we see powerful, relatively powerful Islamic parties. And they have presence in the parliament up to, I would say, it depends. It ranges from 20% to 11% in parliament, Kurdish parliament. And what was very much, and we had a Kurdish version, Iraqi Kurdish version of Al-Qaeda called Jund al-Islam, and then became Ansar al-Islam. 2003, they had strong connections with Al-Qaeda because they were members of the Islamic groups that went to Afghanistan to fight with the Mujahideen, and they were radicalized or indoctrinated by Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. What was very interesting and alarming for the general public here is that the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan was very well received by some of these political Islamic parties in Iraqi Kurdistan, and some of the leaders were very open in sending congratulatory messages and saying that it was your victory against America and everything else. So the threat of radicalized version of Islam, not the moderate, the radicalized version of Islam exists more in Iraqi Kurdistan than in Syrian Kurdistan.
So Kamal, are you okay with the answer, or do you have another question to that?
Maybe about the situation in Sinjar, in Shingal, and the Yazidi minority, Hiwa.
Shingal is a bit more complicated. There are various players who are included. There is the Shingal agreement that is an attempt to restore the situation back to some kind of normalcy in the area, but you have the presence of outside forces. The YPS, the Shingal Protection Units, and you have the PMF, the Hashd al-Shabi, there's KDP, and there's Iraqi government. And it is a lot more complicated than the normal, but the Yazidis who are in Shingal areas now, they are not under the oppression that was, I mean, there is no way to compare, but many of them have not returned to their areas yet. And you cannot say that Shingal today has a normal situation so that you can look at the various situations of governance in these areas. And Turkey, the other day, they bombed a hospital in the area under the pretext of PKK.
Yeah, this was also another question of a viewer, so thank you, Kamal, for asking this question. I've always had great respect for the complexity of this conflict. Thanks for making it a little less complicated, but I think I won't be able to write a book, so it seems more complicated. Maybe we can get a little bit a spark of hope. Do you think there is hope for Syria?
I hope so.
Yeah, it's your name.
Look, we only have to be hopeful.
Yeah, you need to.
Sometimes they say the darkest moments of night are the moments before dawn. So
yeah.
We just have to be hopeful. We have no other choice but to be optimistic and hopeful, but plan for the worst.
Yeah, that's true. So thank you, Hiwa, for taking time and telling us about the conflict. It was a great pleasure to have you here. We were a lot of excited. And let me end with another fun fact about you. Kamal told me about your father. He's a board member of our organization, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and he told me that he is a big fellow of Mustafa Barzani. Did I pronounce it right?
Yes, he worked closely with General Barzani during the September Revolution from 1961 to 1975.
Yeah, Kamal seemed really proud of that, so I have to mention it. Thank you very much, and thank you for all your work, not just for coming here tonight, but that you were so active, that you are so activated, and it's really good and great to know you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and I hope I was useful.
You were, believe me.
Thank you very much, dear Hiwa.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you soon.
Hopefully.
Und vielen Dank an alle Zuschauer und bis zum nächsten Mal dann. Goodbye and good night.
Goodbye.